Hello, everybody. Welcome to this panel on how to engage your team after implementing a mindfulness program with Andy Lee, founder of Mindful Ethos and former chief of mindfulness at Aetna. Welcome, Andy. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Lucia. It's great to be with you today.
We would love to hear a little bit about your background, yourself. I know we have some exciting topics to talk about today and can't wait to hear some questions from the audience too.
Okay. Well, I'll start with giving you a little bit of background, just so you know kind of where I'm coming from. My background is actually in human resources, learning and development, and leadership development, and I've done a lot of different types of things in human resources. I discovered mindfulness about 20 years ago, and I was introduced to it actually by an executive coach at work. And since then, I've continued to practice mindfulness and to see the connection between what it's done for me personally and what it can do for other people to help them manage and be successful in today's really challenging work environment, with all this information and technology and all these things going on. And so I've been teaching mindfulness in the workplace for about 10 years. Have worked with a lot of different companies. And as you mentioned, for 3 years, I was the chief mindfulness officer at Aetna before I founded my current company, Mindful Ethos. And I learned so much about what it takes to engage people and to get people to really get the value out of mindfulness. And I'm really happy to be able to continue that work.
That's wonderful, Andy. And I know, like you said, you're very big into mindfulness and potentially starting the day with some meditation. And before we begin this panel, I think it would be a great idea to maybe take a minute of mindful breathing. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. So why don't we do a very brief mindfulness practice now? We can take a posture that is both alert and relaxed, putting both feet flat on the floor, straightening out the back, maybe pulling the shoulder blades together behind the back. I find that's really helpful. Letting the hands just fall into the lap wherever they're comfortable. And just gently allowing the eyes to close. And noticing what it feels like to stop in the middle of a busy day. And noticing what's present for you right now. What's the state of mind? What are the thoughts? What are the emotions that are present right now? Now noticing the fact that you're breathing, and bring your awareness to the sensations of breathing. Not needing to control the breath, just observing it as it moves in and out of the body. Perhaps letting your attention rest right on the tip of the nose, right in the nostrils. Right at the nostrils where the breath is drawn into the body and released again. And perhaps with each out breath, letting the body settle a little bit more deeply into the chair. Seeing what can be let go of right now. Observing the breath as it moves in and out of the body. And following 3 more cycles of the breath in and out of the body. Seeing if we can be fully present for each one, maybe even savoring each breath. And when you're ready, allowing your eyes to gently open again. And maybe if you feel like it, this is a great time to just maybe take a little stretch. Stretching the body, twisting it, whatever feels good right now. How was that, Lucia?
It was wonderful. I always love to take a little bit of a break. In the middle of the day, I think it's such an important thing. And it's a lot what we're going to talk about today is, how to be able to bring this into the workplace. I think it's such an important thing, like you said earlier. But before we delve into the topic, I do want to remind everybody that this is an interactive panel, which means you can ask questions at any time to Andy by typing them in the Q&A chat box, or the chat feature, so whichever you prefer. And your questions will be addressed live here in this session. So, and then for those of you joining us through YouTube as well, please feel free to write down your questions and to be able to ask us. So with that said, I do have some questions myself about the topic of engagement today. I think it's definitely been a challenge in the workplace nowadays. But before we delve into engagement, why should every company implement a mindfulness program? And more importantly, what has been your experience leading this sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many good reasons for companies to implement mindfulness programs, and you can probably break them down into well, several, I would say. First, you can think about the benefits for the individuals, because it helps people to manage their stress more effectively, to enhance their focus, to be able to focus on their work and cut out distractions more effectively, and to be more creative and to be more engaged, to become better listeners and build better relationships. Um, it's also very helpful for companies overall. If you look at the metrics that certainly HR looks at in terms of how are we doing, the things that companies pay attention to, things like turnover and employee engagement and healthcare costs. Those things can all be impacted to some extent, some more than others, by mindfulness practice. Employee engagement certainly is one thing that can be very powerfully implemented, and companies are paying attention to that. Companies are paying attention more than ever to how stressed their employees are and what resources they can make available to help them manage that stress. The other thing is that most people understand that mindfulness helps to relieve stress and enhance well-being. But people are not as familiar with the fact that mindfulness can actually help us to do our jobs more effectively and help companies to work more effectively, because it does help us to enhance our ability to focus. It enhances our ability to collaborate and to do a lot of the things that it takes for companies to be more effective. So those are just some of the reasons that I think it's really important for every company to have some sort of mindfulness resources available for their employees.
Thank you, Andy, and definitely agree with everything you said. I think definitely the idea of proving it with metrics is so important nowadays, especially for those who might not be so aware of the impact of mindfulness in the workplace. And we actually have our first question here, which is a really good one, really interesting, by an anonymous attendee. They ask, what do you say to those who just don't believe in meditation or mindfulness?
Well, that's a really good question. That really depends on the situation. But honestly, if I'm bringing mindfulness into a company, there's going to be a lot of people that are interested in mindfulness. And in a way, it kind of makes sense to talk to the people that are interested. And if someone's open-minded, there's certainly a lot of research that's available. That's one of the things that I think can sway people who are skeptics, let's say, who say, I don't know about this stuff. There's a lot. Last year there were over 800 research papers published on mindfulness. So there's a lot of research that that you can draw on to show that mindfulness is effective. On the other hand, some people just are not interested. They don't believe in it, or it's not their cup of tea, and that's okay. We don't have to convince everybody. You know, there are many people that are very interested in mindfulness, and we can let people find their own way. Sometimes the best way for people to learn about it is to see what other people get out of it, instead of trying to convince them or argue with them that this is what they need to do.
Thank you, Andy. That's a great answer. And here, Joanne asks, where can I get some of those metrics you mentioned that show the lower turnover, lower healthcare costs? Where are some resources that they can use?
Well, there was a great paper published at Aetna in 2012. The lead author was Ruth Woollever, Wolever, and in that paper they document both stress reduction and physiological benefits, as well as productivity benefits. So there's a number of different places you can go. There's also a good overview paper called Contemplating Mindfulness at Work, and the lead author of that is Darren Good. which is his last name is spelled Good. Those are great places to get started, to get an overview of the research. And there's also, Harvard Business Review publishes a lot about mindfulness, as does Forbes magazine. So those are two other great resources online. If you just Google mindfulness, in those two publications, you'll find a lot to work with.
Thanks, Sandy. And Joanne, we would be more than happy to send you some links as well after the webinar. I think it's very important that everybody has this information, whether you want to make a case or whether you just want to know it for yourself. I think it's such a great knowledge. Again, I encourage, the audience to ask questions. What are some of the challenges you've had in terms of, implementing mindfulness at work? I think it's such an important topic to discuss. But in the meantime, going back to our topic today about engagement, right? This is the real challenge everybody's facing. How do you keep people engaged in the long term with mindfulness and with the mindfulness program? What are some of the ways that team members can engage others in the long term?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because even when there's a lot of energy around mindfulness, you can offer a program and people can love it. And then all of a sudden, what's next? Where do we go from here? People can sometimes feel almost let down because they get turned on to this great thing and then they're trying to figure out how to go forward. Or they just kind of forget about it and lose interest. So engagement is really important. There's a number of things that you can do to keep engagement going. One is, I just have to mention this, and is that actually apps are really useful because they're very accessible to people. You can use them wherever you are. A lot of employers pick up the cost of apps, and that's a way that you can kind of a baseline, kind of the go-to option that's always there. However, that's not alone going to solve your engagement issues. Some of the things that can help is to create communities, in the organization that perhaps meditate together or that share information together. Another thing that you can do is do events. Like at Aetna, for instance, we did speakers. We had speakers come in regularly, and that kind of refreshes things. It brings in a new outside perspective, and it doesn't have to be a big name. It can be someone local, but of course it has to be someone. And I have to emphasize this. It has to be someone who is trained as a mindfulness teacher, has a good, solid background, and has taught in the workplace before. You don't want to bring in people who, won't resonate with your audience. But certainly speakers can be very helpful. Another thing that people struggle with a lot is finding the time to meditate. And some people also feel awkward meditating in their workspace. So some of the things that can be done is you can create spaces for mindfulness practice, and it doesn't have to be a dedicated space. It can be a conference room that's reserved for maybe half an hour a day, so that people know that they can go in there and somebody can play a mindfulness practice and people can practice together. So those are some of the things that can be done. Another thing on a company level that can help to keep mindfulness going is if you connect it to the business goals that are happening right now. So is your company focused on, for instance, quality, or is it focused on customer service, or is it focused on innovation? Mindfulness can help with all of these things. And if you can say, help the company reach its goals, mindfulness practice helps us to be more innovative, then it'll give it some legs and it'll give it some energy, and it can get other managers behind it if they see the connection between what you're doing and what's important to the company. So those are just some of the ideas to get us started in terms of how to keep things going at work.
Those are great ideas. I love the idea of definitely building a space. I think that's environment is huge when it comes to meditating, to mindfulness in general, and the idea of doing it as a community. I think, here at Wellness Coach by Meditation Live, we're also about creating communities and bringing people together. And I think once you do things with somebody else, like they can hold you accountable. It's such a different experience. So I love all those ideas. Again, would love to hear what the audience is thinking. Do you see yourself implementing these ideas at work? Is this something that you can do? We do have a question here as well by Anonymous. The question is there a correlation between a mindfulness program, and an NPS score?
Net Promoter Score? Well, certainly there is. The Net Promoter Score is just so people know, it's a common way that people see whether their program, generally an online program, is whether people like it. And you can build that into a survey. It's a very simple survey question. You can find the wording online, and it brings up a broader point, which is that yes, you can do a survey using Net Promoter Score to say, would you recommend our mindfulness program to someone else? But the broader point is that you do want to continually evaluate. You want to continually manage, assess your programs, whether it's through Net Promoter Scores or focus groups or just informal feedback. Whatever you're doing, always continue to get that feedback to say, how's it going? What can we shift? What can we change? That's really actually being mindful. That's part of mindfulness practices, is being connected with what's going on right here and right now, and making changes as they make sense, being open to making changes, not getting too attached to what we're doing right now, but remaining flexible. And we have to do that not only in our mindfulness practice, but when we roll out mindfulness programs as well.
It's a great answer, Andy, and it makes total sense. Another question here from another attendee. For some, there comes a stigma with the term mindfulness. Is there another term or way of explaining mindfulness that may welcome more people to incorporate it into their lives in the workplace?
Yeah, excuse me. That's a good question. And I can only tell you that the simpler you make this, the more simply you can explain things, the better. So I'll give you my definition of mindfulness. It's about paying attention to your present moment experience with an attitude of openness and curiosity. That's it. Present moment, here and now, open and curious. Okay. So if you break it down in that way, I mean, what's not to like? It's really not that complicated. And meditation is an exercise. It's an exercise for the brain that helps us to be more present throughout the day. Having said that, I do know what you mean, because, excuse me, if you ask someone, who doesn't know much about mindfulness, do you want to be more mindful? They're going to kind of give you an odd look, right? They might scratch their head or not know what you're talking about. But if you tell them, do you want to feel less stress? Do you want to feel like in a more positive mood? Do you want to enhance your focus? Do you want to enhance your connection, your presence with your family and your coworkers? Then they'll say, yeah, I'm interested in that. So you can actually, what I would do is, instead of talking about introduction to mindfulness, I would talk about something like, just for example, introduction to resilience, using through mindfulness, something like that. So don't get hung up on the word mindfulness. Focus on the benefits that mindfulness can bring. And I think that can help. The other thing I'll say is that there are people who kind of are not into mindfulness. For other people, mindfulness is something that draws them in. I mean, now we have mindful parenting, we had mindful driving, mindful exercise. So there's a lot of people who actually like that word, and it's a benefit. So I wouldn't totally throw it out right away. But one thing that can help, I think, is to keep it simple and to start with the benefit and not with the word mindfulness in particular.
Thanks, Andy. And that makes a lot of sense. The word has become mainstream nowadays. It does feel like it's everywhere. So eating so it does make a lot of sense what you're saying. We have another here. Joanne shared an experience that I want to read out. I think it's really interesting. Basically, she says, in the group I'm volunteering and leading at my company, the first group I've ever led, I started with a small group of 7, and it whittled down to 2 and 3 after a few weeks. I will do a survey to get info from those that signed up and what did and didn't work for them. So I think that's a good idea. But I'm wondering if what I'm experiencing is common.
It's not uncommon. I mean, there's so much that goes into this. It's really hard to draw any conclusions from the information that you gave. But yeah, things come up. People sometimes are just too busy, or maybe it was some dynamic of the group in particular. It's just really hard to tell. I will say that it is not uncommon that a lot of times people would simply say, well, I didn't have the time anymore, or I had something else that I needed to do, or, it's really hard to say. So what I would say is exactly what you said. We're not going to know unless the people who leave tell you. And if they're kind and generous, they'll answer a survey or they'll answer an email and give you some insight into what's the issue where you are.
Thanks, Sandy. And another question here, what level of adoption should be expected after launching a program with an app?
That's a really good question, and I bet there's someone on your side, Lucia, who has a better answer for this than I do.
Yes, I
Um,
can probably answer it as well.
okay, well
But
let me just say one thing before we get started. At Aetna, I know that a successful engagement rate for a general wellness program was around 20%. You know, if you can get more than 20% of employees doing something, that's considered a win in a corporation. And we have gotten more than that involved in mindfulness. But just remember that the goal, you need to be realistic about your goals. And if you're seeing that level of engagement, that's amazing, and it could take a little while to get there. It could also go beyond that, but just remember that this is not going to be for everyone. Everyone knows that exercise is good for them, and we've known that for 40, 50 years. What percentage of people go to the gym regularly? It's probably not more than 20%, So just be realistic and continue to build with the people that are interested. And what do you have to add to that, Lucia, from your experience?
so I think, for us, it's been definitely a learning experience. We've actually gotten a pretty good rate of adoption, and a lot of our stats can be found at meditation.live if you're looking for that. But I think it's something that you said earlier. It's about making it easy for people to access, and making it engaging. Not only launching an app with your team, but adding rewards to it and adding incentives. Making it interesting for people to sort of adopt it as part of a culture. And I think, that was one of my questions to you as well. I know you're big into making mindfulness into part of the culture, and that is really our goal as well. Would love to hear your thoughts on this, of how we can go and about achieving that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that is as important as anything. We want individuals to benefit from this practice, but the benefits of mindfulness go much farther than within, one person. It can affect how a whole company how we treat each other inside a company, how we work and collaborate with each other, how we deal with success and with failure and with learning, how we deal with change. All these kinds of things can be shifted, I think, in a positive direction with mindfulness. One of the things that I found really helpful is if you can introduce things like just like a minute of silence, for instance, before meetings. Or you can introduce other practices that are actually not mindfulness, but they do promote a more balanced and kind of present mindset. Things like asking people to stop multitasking, to try to do just one thing at a time. Starting meetings 5 minutes after the hour so people can arrive refreshed, having gone to the bathroom and gotten a drink of water, which is really just pretty basic stuff that we often don't even have time for at work. And ending meetings by going around and asking each person to say something about what they got out of the meeting or what they're going to do next. So creating ways to create, implementing like work tips, very simple practices that can change our experience throughout the day. I think those things, besides just meditation, those are the kinds of practical things that anyone can do that can really start to shift the culture in a company.
Definitely agree. And all those are great tips. By the way, we would be happy to send this recording to everybody at the end. If you want to remember some of them, I know we bounced around a few different ideas. And I think they were all amazing. I do want to remind everybody we have about 6 minutes left. And if you have any more questions for Andy, anything you want to mention, any experiences you've had running a mindfulness program and even getting your team members to engage, we would love to hear about it. It's all about learning here today and sharing our experiences. And I do have, one last question for you, Andy. Actually, one question just came in, so I'll prioritize that one. But the question is there anything that surprised you during implementation, in implementing it?
Well, we were doing things for the first time, so in a way, everything was surprising. But I was surprised that, you know, one of the things that I always find surprising, which is kind of it doesn't really make sense to say you're always surprised by something, but the kind of feedback that you get from mindfulness programs, from even like a 1 hour or a 90-minute webinar, which we used to do, or multi-week programs where people say, this has really changed my life. This has really changed how I go through the day. It's changed how how I relate to my team members. And the type of feedback you get is always very gratifying. And it's different from the kind of stuff you get when you teach project management or time management or that kind of thing. So that's one of the things that I found always surprising, although that doesn't make sense. I'm trying to think of the other things that I found surprising. And I'm sure there's a lot of them. They're not just coming to me right now.
You can take some time to think about it, and we can always sort of go back to this question. I think, like you said, everything is very new. So a lot of the things that you're going to encounter are going to be for the first time anyway. So it's something that's inevitable that way.
Right.
But my last question to you, I wanted to hear some takeaways from your experience at Aetna. Is there anything else that we should know about, that we should learn about or be mindful of when we are thinking of bringing mindfulness into the workplace?
Yeah, there are. And a couple of things that I think are helpful to think about. One is if you can make these resources available in different ways. We talked about an app, we talked about groups that meet in person. There might be virtual groups. We used to run just a phone meditation where people would call into a phone conference line, and somebody would guide a mindfulness practice, someone that they knew. Or creating digital resources, like work tips, as I mentioned. Lists of work tips are really helpful for people because it's stuff they can do every day and they don't have to stop and meditate. Although I think that that's really not a big burden, but some people, this is just another way for people to engage. If you can create videos and blogs, or find videos and blogs. Videos are getting so much more popular now. So, YouTube is a great resource, and there's a lot of other great resources where you can share mindfulness videos. I think that's another great way. Different people like different things. So thinking about different ways to offer mindfulness resources. Let's see, I made some other notes here. Oh yeah, another thing that I found helpful. This depends on your company, the size of the company and the culture, but I think it's really helpful to measure everything, right? Do surveys, get feedback, go to HR, get those numbers about turnover, get whatever kind of data you have, because that helps to make the business case. And one of the things that really helps mindfulness programs to continue is funding. And the way we get funding is by presenting data and the business case. So that's another thing that's really important. The last one I'll mention is getting people involved. Getting people involved to offer things, to offer their time, to help to promote things. Mindfulness is the kind of thing that if people are into it, they want to get involved. They want to support it. And you have to be careful because you can't have everybody pretending as though they're an expert and doing whatever they want, doing their own personal practice that works for them, but may not be appropriate to the workplace. So there's a balance there. But finding a way to get people involved and to harness their energy to bring mindfulness forward in the workplace.
I think those are great tips. And I do want to hone down on the measuring part, because that's such an important one. Without data, we wouldn't have anything. We wouldn't be able to learn anything. And I do want to share some exciting news that we have. At Meditation Live, we just launched our Emotional Health Index, our EHI. And basically what this is a metric that allows you to see adoption rate, categories being used throughout regions from your team. So all of these stats are key in order to establish a successful mindfulness program. And I think, like you said, measuring is such a big thing now. So I just wanted to share that little snippet of news that we have on our end. So on my end, this has been amazing, Andy. Thank you so much for all your wisdom. I feel like I learned so much. I hope the audience has too. Do you want to close us out with some words of wisdom or anything you want to mention?
Well, I just want to thank everybody who's participating, and just keep it going. Don't give up. Don't, just a gentle and consistent effort will lead to great things. So don't think about the outcome as much as just think about the next step. What's the next step I can take to move this forward?
Thank you, Andy. That's wonderful words. And thank you, everybody, for being here and for your amazing questions. We'll see you next time.